Doo-doo-doo.
There you go.
Alrighty. All right, since we just started recording, just to give context, I'm about to give a brief report back on a meeting that John Bova, Rafael Sedania, and I had yesterday about getting the Discord migration rolling. So a few things we talked about in terms of uh, overall strategic perspectives that we want to bring to the group immediately today, so that we can then go through with a proposal we'd like to make that essentially we initiate the migration next Monday. The idea would be to kind of work backwards from that proposal, that next Monday we would meet. I would share screen and walk through the current kind of structure for the Discord that the three of us mapped out. We could all live edit it, talk over any changes right then and there. Spend, if everyone's like thumbs up, then we go live immediately. If people are like, well, actually, let's try, then we take the time to do that. And then we go live that day. We can start setting things up. And then and I want to give credit where credit's due to John Bova, because I love this proposal. He proposed closing down WhatsApp, and if it makes sense to be able to bring your conversation with Alexander over from Zulip as well on the Lunar New Year. So we make a quick turnaround. We get everything set up. We answer any questions, make sure people have all the stuff set up so that they can use it on their phones or computers or whatever. We also make sure to have everything properly backed up and archived. And if we run into any issues there, John's volunteered to help manually archive information. So that's the general like overall proposal we want to make, is to kind of move fairly quickly, because frankly, there's no reason not to. Discord's very easy to configure. And it's also very forgiving in the sense that if we decide something doesn't work, we don't have to rebuild it from scratch. We just make some changes live and we can go from there. As far as kind of the strategic perspective, some of the things we talked about were, one, Discord spaces can definitely be kind of terminally online social spaces. We're thinking of this more as like an extension the way like something like Slack is, where it's a place we go to get work done, but it's not a substitute for the various kinds of connections we're attempting to build, both quote unquote in person, but also all the other just things that we're doing and connected to. And so in that sense, we want to continue to have like essentially a minimal threshold of membership. It's going to be a very STP like threshold, which is, hey, can I join? And there you are. But you do have to like take that proactive step. Just like if you want to join the WhatsApp now, you have to show up to a meeting or reach out to someone. So it's that same minimal step. I still need to do a little research, so I'll have this I'll have another things kind of specifically honed in next Monday, including any costs, some of the archiving questions we had, but also there's a distinction between administrators and moderators. So I kind of want to flesh that out a bit, especially for security, since we're entering a new and interesting time politically. But the long and the short of it is, we could have like what I'm thinking right now is we could have a couple people be administrators, since that's basically gods of Discord. They can do whatever they want with the server. And then we can have moderators, which are kind of limited administrators by the administrator. So, and then a moderator position would be as simple as, again, someone just asking. The one thing we're considering proposing there, though, is to set up a bot that if someone doesn't do anything for the admin position or for the moderator position after like 30 days, the bot like takes them off the list. So it'd be a very impersonal way to keep that list short, and it would be simply based upon the criteria of involvement. All you'd have to do is ask again. And we actually think we could set it up so the bot could also be the receiver of that request. So there wouldn't be any kind of awkward personal sense of shame of like, oh, I didn't do anything, I gotta like go to someone and be mea culpa or whatever. Like, you just go to the little AI, and the AI says, yes, you may. And then a while later says, you haven't been doing that much. And security, that's just basic administrative logic. If people aren't doing it regularly, you take them off the administrator list. It's not personal. It's just how any IT is run or should be run. And having seen it not run that way, it's not good. So, and then there's we're basically talking about kind of importing the existing threads from WhatsApp and any particular conversations from Zulip as channels, which are the kind of fundamental unit. We can also then use categories to organize all the channels. So we'll have some proposals around that. And then there's a number of archiving purposes. So I'll wrap up on that. There are, you actually have the ability in Discord to link to a particular comment. And so you can kind of go through and create a number of what are called message links, and we can dedicate a page to archiving important conversations. So that we can be like, interesting conversation on mode B and like 18th of Brumaire. Boom. Oh, we had this great talk on like dream cats and like gift exchange. Boom. And so A, it's just great indexing for us, but also B, it allows newer folks to like peruse the history without just having to scroll infinitely. And then we can do a similar thing where we can link to the channels directly, and we can create essentially like a table of contents or a kind of quick guide, again, so that people can kind of look at and have everything kind of in one place. We can do similar things with any of the administrative information we need for YouTube, Google Drive, etc. We can kind of all set that up so it's all easily available. We can use pinned comments to link to those pages so that people can very quickly move from point A to point B. And we can also set up essentially like get to know the server bots that will reach out and be like, hey, do you need help? Blah, blah, blah. So because we just know that like as much as we want to be friendly and available, the mental work of keeping track of who doesn't know what so that we fill them in so that it's as equitable and accessible as possible, like is just a lot of work. So to the degree that we can automate it and that we can kind of flatten it so it's all in one place and easy to see, that's going to be the goal. So that's the gist of it. John and Raphael, if I missed anything essential, which I probably did, please jump in now.
I think that's it.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I think you went to the most important details, and I think next week we'll be able to flesh things out. So I don't think there's any problem missing anything today.
Cool. Well, with that in mind, then, are there any questions or immediate feedback? I'm happy to just, be done with that and move on, but I also want to make sure we field questions.
Oh, there's one thing I wanted to mention that I think is I sorry, John, I just said there was nothing, but then I said there's something. I think it's very important to stress that we discussed this. Most of the things we discussed we think are pretty straightforward, but we think that one thing that needs a bigger group feedback is on the criteria for new people joining the Discord. Me and the Johns, we have come to a bit of a consensus, but I think it's good to get everyone's opinion, and I think we can talk about it in detail next week. But of course, it relates to what John said about trying to think FCP is not an online group, but as a group that has certain material basis, and that Discord will work in a sense like a Slack in a company, a place, as he said, like where we go to do stuff, to solve stuff, but stuff that exists outside of this workspace.
Just it's not related to the Discord, but just a reminder that Rafael brought to my mind. we from the funding sort of commission, we think we're probably sending the first, how do you say, cobrança? So based on, so people fill in the spreadsheet with the recurrent fundings, and I think before the end of the month, we can start sending the first, I don't know, something like reminders for the recurrent contributions and get that running.
That
Also, we
number-
could we currently have what, 3, 6, 8 people contributing. I don't know if, I mean, I sent it already 3 times, so I guess I'm not sure people are still adding their names, but yeah.
I think for this meeting and next meeting, at least, well, this meeting you already did it, but next meeting, we could just remind everyone also who are joining the meeting, you know, so that by the end of the month, we've tried, you know, to let everyone know to contribute. So we can trust, well, whatever number we do get of contributors, we can also interpret that number a bit, right? Like if people were aware.
What does Victor's question mean in the chat?
Yeah, I was a bit confused too. What does pre-meeting or post-meeting mean?
No, I mean like people will come to the Discord like after getting involved in the organization, not like a way to know, and so they'll enter the Discord after participating at least in a meeting. Or I mean like, because for other organizations that use Discord, it's like a recruitment front. So
Mhm.
people go to the Discord, get close, and then they participate. But we're like doing the inverse. People participate and then they go to the Discord to participate more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure how you guys see this, and I mean, we do have to that topic connects very well with the other topic of the meeting, which is this book project, what it means, and how it fits into a general strategy for the group. But both due just to an intuition and due to the like what we've been learning about STP by trying to regularly present its work in person in Rio. It might be just a private thing, but personally, I don't think, I mean, first of all, we're substituting our internal communication system for Discord. So if we substitute the internal system for an external one, it won't be a substitution. Like if it no longer is the internal place where we only talk amongst ourselves, we're already going to be losing something. But secondly, I do think that I think that if we were just a political group, recruiting would mean, you know, getting people engaged with the group and doing actions and so on. But since it's also a research thing, I don't see necessarily the value of quantitatively growing and having too many debates that don't engage with the dynamic and the stuff that we're doing. Like, I rather make sure we have the internal thing for people who have slightly stronger connections. And then if we want to create a channel or a part of it that is open for like a general debate, that's fine. But I would be a bit worried about like not preserving some space where we get to build up the qualitative relations between people who are in the group, you know? That's something that I worry a bit. I'm not sure if it makes sense.
Yeah, this is just to chime in, because this is something we talked about, and I think when we talked about it, it was to solve an internal problem. So it's a substitute for WhatsApp, and in that sense, our main concern is not a public facing space, especially because I think that if there is a public facing space, it requires a different set of concerns, a different set of cares. It probably need to have some sort of moderation or something like that, so it doesn't get out of hand. So I don't think that's what we thought of, but just an example of something that we thought that could be, because I think even a general space would be too much. I think, it's very. I mean, I don't think I would want the research environment to be mixed up with this general internet discussion culture. So I think that, like, for example, if someone is doing a sort of a presentation, a formal presentation on the group's framework, for example, if we decide after we write the book, or we want to do a 12 lesson seminary with people in the group, and then it's open to the public, and then I think it makes sense to open a specific channel devoted to that specific goal. So I think even public facing options have to be very, I think they have to have like a clear objective, because we are not, I don't think like we are in the process of building, a framework that is presentable. So I think that there is not much sense in creating like a large space larger than our legs. So I don't think that at the moment that's what we thought of the Discord as solving. So, but that's also something that I think we said that should be discussed, and it probably will be the main discussion next week, which is the fact that, well, we have to decide, okay, the criteria for people to join the Discord, because as John Bova said, every time you create a Discord, everyone says, "Oh, I'm gonna invite everyone, my grandma, my cousins, my friend who I always wanted to connect to STP," and it just, it doesn't really do anything. So I think as I understood the pre-meeting, post-meeting, Victor said, I mean, it's post-meeting in the sense that there's a connection, right? And I think that's a good sense, even if it's not just going to the meeting. There could be a connection, but I think deciding on the general border of what a connection means is something that is important.
Yeah, I mean, just to second what Rafael said, and Gabriel said about all that, and I just to hone in on, I think, ways to think about alternatives. Like, first off, it's like it's not hard to set up another Discord server. You don't pay for it. There's all kinds of ways to interface them in configurations between the quote inside server and outside server. But I also think, for example, based on what I've heard, for example, the courier strike and whatnot, that something like Telegram might actually be better for a lot of like outward facing things. It really depends on what we're trying to do. And I don't think we have a clear enough idea of that yet. So I think kind of in our ecological metaphors, I think we're trying to develop a membrane right now for the interior of the organization. And we need to have that kind of like structured enough in order to then be able to sustain a kind of intentional relationship with our larger environment. Then we can talk about setting up the kind of public facing things. But yeah, I don't necessarily think like just moderating conversations or debates. I think, we could probably benefit a lot from using Discord as a place to strategize about what debates or public facing things to get involved in. And again, it's very easy to set up channels. It's very easy to there's also these things called threads, which enable one-off conversations that don't require full channel dedication. So I think we'll find there's a lot more flexibility, and that maybe things that we feel like we're not able to do now and that we might want our Discord to like fill the gap. It'll fill the gap, not in and of itself technologically, but by creating a space for us to better discuss how to do that elsewhere or to set it up alternatively.
Just to also use this as a segue to the next topic. I think that it's a really good approach. Makes total sense to me. But I also think that, it is something that we need to work on, I think, in the coming months, coming years even. Where is it that we want to evaluate if the work is moving forward? Like, how do we evaluate, right? I think that there are some measures that we can have that concern the theory itself, because there are problems that we can name, but we don't know how to approach. There are themes and fields where we have no idea how the stuff we're developing affects or reshapes that. But then those things are just theoretical, right? On the political level, if we do conclude, or if we do want to kind of wager that there is a political import to what we do, I think that recent history has shown that it's more on the side of our connection. Like, it's a very strange thing, but that's my current hypothesis at least. I think it's more to do with the connection to organizations and the connection that this can allow between organizations, not only with us, than the connection to individuals, in the sense that a lot of people like what we do, because that doesn't necessarily translate into anything. That is not a bad thing. It's a good thing to have, of course, but I would separate those things. And I think that this brings the idea of the book into play, because it would be probably, I mean, if this book idea makes sense, then it's just arrived, so it's perfect timing. I think that if this book idea makes sense, it's very much because it allows for a point of contact between these two things, right? It would be an attempt to consolidate some things and present them in a way that is transmissible. And also it would create something that is kind of robust enough that people can use to then create groups, take somewhere and discuss. Like, you don't need to buy into the idea that if you make a theoretical statement, it will just reverberate, because theory is reason, and reason is everywhere. You can still take like a more realistic and strategic approach, where once you have things on paper, well, it lends some credibility. It's easier to share with somebody. It gives like a common thing for you to discuss with somebody, like, and kind of promote whatever we're doing through that piece of text, right? So I have the impression that it's timely that we try to do that in a very micro way in Rio this month. We printed drafts. We didn't even print final things. We shared them with specific people. We didn't even have like a big, the very fact we didn't even try to publish them online, I think it's very telling. Like, the focus went on to putting on paper and then sharing the paper version of things. And I think that the effect of it, and the fact that we can still build on it, and the fact we can use it to create local groups and debate what's there, I think that gives a tactical kind of use to putting a book together, and in a way that brings together these two things. Like, to pull this off, we probably need to think about the inner structure of the group so that we can actually put it on paper. And once you have that, probably that would kickstart a new phase in the group, because it would be possible to connect with others in a very different way, right? I think that's another way of putting it is that if we have a book out as STP, once you say you're from STP, you're also saying that you're a specific representative of that book. So wherever it is that you could hold a study group, participate in a debate, and it would be easier for you to speak for the collective. Whereas today, people often feel like they have a hard time explaining what it is. And then they might refer back to older members to say, no, they know what it is. It would like consolidate that there is something that can be known rather than a subject supposed to know, at the core of the group. So I think that it would be a qualitative change in that sense. So I don't think it's just a matter of you know, writing things down and transmitting the theory. I think it would also have like a kind of organizational use as well. It would be a qualitative change in a lot of things.
Yeah, I joined a bit late, but I totally agree with what you're saying. I feel like in STP, like we measure our theory not by how dense it is or how you know how well connected it is to other theories, but I think we try to measure it by what kind of organizational effects it can have. So from that standpoint, I think everything you're saying, Gabriel, about using the book as a way, as an entryway into, you know, speaking with others, having debates and connecting with other people, that seems to be the right way to measure our success here. Like, it's not so much, does this book have all the right references, or does it make all the right arguments, but is it a good conversation starter? Do people feel comfortable representing STP? If like everything in the book, you don't have to agree with everything in the book, but would you be comfortable being a representative of STP given that the contents of the book, something like that? But yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I also think that changes, right? One thing is to say like let's strive to write a book that is like the most detailed technical explanation of every point, right? That's one book. A book that, you know, people who are engaged with STP and are participating in the ongoing research, that they feel okay, this is well-rounded enough that even if not every, perhaps even better than not everything is in this book, because this way I have something to talk to people about, to engage with people, to say, look, there's this hole here, I like to continue developing it, right? But it just creates a different quality of conversation, I think. And I honestly think that everything that removes the core of the group from the online connections through a Zoom meeting, you know, in the sense that if somebody asks, like, what is the core thing that makes this move forward? Anything that relativizes the importance of that, you know, so we do already asynchronous research with smaller groups, things that are happening in parallel, things that are happening in person, things that are happening across the, like, the fact that there is a Zoom meeting every Monday shouldn't be the core thing. And in that sense, I think the book would really help that decentralization process while also keeping something invariant, you know. So, but that does sound to me like a slightly different style of book than it could be. Like it narrows a bit what we might be striving for. And just another point, Rafa, just before I pass the word, I think it also clarifies something, which is there are at least two big ways in which people can contribute. They might, I mean, I have a list of things that we could go over now, and I think that we should like already try to look at what we've done as a possible skeleton and see if we can think of things that we could add to that skeleton. But besides adding sections, because I think it's also untenable to imagine that everyone's going to add chapter, right? It would be like many volumes a book. There's still the fact that we need people to read through what exists and already, let's say, imbue the book with the right style, because we want people who are not comfortable with this to understand. So people in the group who feel like I'm not comfortable enough to write something, they still have a core function to play, right? In making things understandable, asking the questions, revising and saying, this doesn't make sense to me, things like that, right? So it's an interesting perspective reversal where usually you have people writing and the people who do the revision feel like they're more experts than the people who wrote. In our case, probably the best way to go about it would be the inverse, where we need as core revisers, precisely the people who feel the least comfortable with the material, because that's the measure, right? To see if it's already ready for publication, to make it understandable by people who are not, let's say, deeply embedded in the lingo or concepts we're using already.
I think this is great. This revision idea is really good, especially because I think I agree a lot with the underlying idea that the group, the book project is a very good idea of us getting on the same page in a certain sense, not in the sense of everybody being the same level of being comfortable, but at least we will get a better image of what being comfortable or not looks like. So I think in a sense that's a good idea. I do wonder if before we begin discussing, I wonder if it would be good to do a sort of an exercise. It would be if people want to share, like, what do they expect of, what are they thinking when we think about, like, what do we want about the book project, about who it is addressed to, what it's meant to accomplish. I wonder if it would be a good idea if people, well, of course, not everybody has to say, but it could be a good idea to also start fine-tuning where we are at the beginning before looking at the material, the skeleton. I don't know if you guys think that's a good idea or not.
You mean like come up with a list of topics we would like to see covered, or?
No, not the topics. I think that would be more for the skeleton part, but like, what do we want for the book? You know,
Can
like,
you give
for
an example,
example,
like what from you?
yeah, I was gonna give, yeah. So, for example, a person could say, "Oh, I think the book would be interesting because the book would be an opportunity to see what sort of consensus we have in STP," or the book would be a good idea because I think from that we can connect to other organizations, or I think, of course, we might want all of these things in a sense, but I think it might be good to see where we are in general in regards to the address of the book, to what we are looking for the results. What do we want when the book is released? What is the effect that we might want? We could also just skip to the skeleton then.
I can say something which it's something I realized recently. Like, I don't think, again, I don't think that we gave it the importance that it deserved. Like, it was a bit of a side thing. But twice our text working through political organization brought us in contact with militants that looked us up, right? First was the students in Vienna. We didn't say anything. They found the text, they discussed it amongst them, and then they thought that we had something to do with what they're doing. And then the Communist Caucus did the same thing. We didn't look them up. We didn't know who they were. They read it. They said, look, this has something to do with what we are doing, and we want to get in touch. So I think that there are two things in that those two interactions that are very interesting. The first is that something in what we're doing, I mean, it's not like we were officially looked by organizations that are very well established. We were approached by small organizations, but they presented themselves as groups. They didn't present as, I'm a person, I'm interested. Like, a lot of people who join STP do like that. Like, personally, I'm interested, I want to follow the research, and then they do, right? That was a slightly different type of connection. So that's the first point. And the second point is that whatever process they were engaged in, it wasn't over. It was in the middle of it. And I find that very singular. Like, when the circle existed, the circle of studies of idea and ideology, most militant connections we had happened after a defeat or a failure. People joined because something bad had happened in the past, not because they want to avoid it from happening in the future. Like, something is going on and we don't want it to end. And there's something in this conversation which could help with that. I find those two facts, that it's organizations and not individuals, and that it's in the middle of a process and not after it happened, very singular. We didn't search it, but clearly it's more, let's say, attuned, right, to where we want it to be. but we didn't search it out. We didn't like promote ourselves online saying, hey, are you in the middle of a political process? Would you like to? Nothing like that. And still it happened. So there is something in that I think it's worth thinking about. Again, I think if I were to point any failure into 2023, I'd say is the fact that this wasn't like the biggest thing that happened to us to 2023, because that's major. I don't think that happens often. I don't think many groups are called upon in this particular way. And I would look to the book as something that, you know, should kind of get us more of that, right? Why it worked, I think it's something worth pondering. It's not obvious to me why. And also, if there isn't something to the fact that these were groups that were very much, let's say, interested in something that we were already theoretically debating, like Communist Caucus, perhaps it's more political in the sense that they were interested in the specific thesis we presented, the peripherization thesis. Whereas the Vienna students, it is a bit more abstract. It's hard to pinpoint. So it's not, doesn't mean like, let's do the same thing again, but it might mean that we should be mindful of this, and like, there might be other ways of even increasing the scope of groups that might be interested in talking, you know? But I do think that that's something that's already happening, and we should like take care of it, you know, like purposefully do it rather than mindlessly.
I'm just reading Victor's real quick. Nice. Okay. So yeah, so I agree with everything that's been said up to now, and I think that what I'm going to say connects to it in just a different dimension of looking at it. I think a lot of the work that we do, even though like a lot of times we look at it very abstractly and it's very formal or very kind of these weird syntheses, like for me, it's had very tangible kind of effects in how I kind of see social space, see the like the opportunities, the connections, kind of understand the dynamics that are going on. And I think that this kind of connects a bit also to what Victor wrote here as well about I've got really fed up with a lot of the, I guess you could say, stereotypes or commonplaces of what organizing is, of what activism is, what's expected. You know, the measurement of what makes good or bad organizing, I think, is completely shot at this point. And trying to create something that when someone walks away from reading our work, they can look around and have like a better cognitive map. But also, I think one of the things that's been very important for me personally, and it seems to have resonated with a lot of other people, is there's something very freeing and I think kind of motivating about the political experimental perspective. I think it helps to get out of a lot of the leftist discursive traps we have that really kind of predicate themselves on like assuming that you can kind of reason your way to the correct politics in a discourse, as opposed to actually having to construct political experiments. And once you start to look at what that means to test something out in a social process, and then to attempt to evaluate that, I think that's something that a lot of people are excited about, even though it's very clear we're still just beginning to scratch the surface of what that even means. And that for me has had like a subjective change as well. So I'd like people to kind of walk away from the book having and seeing and kind of like feeling like they have more in their hands, almost like a toolkit, but also well, we're talking about like the 18th of Brumaire and stuff. That was a book that really helped clarify things to me. So that's an aspiration for what we could do as well.
I also think that on this point, it's funny because I remember Vitor told me he was talking to a friend of ours who's part of a political movement in Brazil, Caio, and after Vitor explained kind of what we're striving to do, and he read our text, he says, "Oh, you guys seem like you're trying to change." So it's a mindset issue, right? Like it's not proposing strategies, just changing how people think about things. And we were having this discussion afterwards with other people, and I do think that this is the I would say that there are 3 levels in which we can interact politically with the world. I would say perhaps even 4 levels. Like the first level is exactly what John said, even though I have the impression that it requires something else, like it's engagement with the theory plus a little thing, either like connection with people, you know, from the group, so that it eases into your life and you see other people thinking in a similar way. Usually, if you don't see it as a collective thing, it's hard for you to adopt something, right? Then I think that there is the most obvious one, which is like transfer of knowledge, right? You engage with a group and you pass on knowledge along, and you say, you know, there is this Soviet thinker who said that there's no such thing as total disorganization. And people go like, oh, that's a cool idea. Now we know Bogdanov said that. Thanks, right? Or you say, oh, Karatani said this about the modes. And you say, oh, cool, thank you very much. We're happy to learn about this. That's fine as well. That's like teaching, right? So one level is like sensibility. You can change individual sensibility. Second level is you can teach people something. I think the third level is something that we managed to do a bit of with the Vienna students, which is like almost like analytic, because they came to talk to us. We heard them very carefully, and then we tried to ask things and engage with them in a conversation that they seem to look at their own organizational process slightly different than how they represented it to themselves before. So it is analytic in the sense that you mediate something through STP, and you might get a different picture of what you were doing than before. And it's slightly different than changing sensibility, like John was saying, because it's individually, people still might think similarly. Like they still have the same prejudices or the same, they don't need to adopt what we're saying, either theoretically or even like the group, right? Or even think it's true, what the theory behind things. But in the engagement with that organization, sometimes things change a bit. Like we were talking about how something similar happened recently when we were discussing, Vitor, Rafael, myself, and others, the movement of the Invisíveis in Brazil. And I think something similar happened in that discussion, where you allow people to present the narrative of political process, but you try to intervene and to return, right? Give back your view of those things in a way that once certain aspects are highlighted, the process looks slightly different, and there might be more opportunities, more things to do, other problems that you didn't think before. That's kind of analogous to analysis, right? So sensibility, teaching, analysis, and then I think that there's the last thing, which for me remains the most radical horizon I can see us engaging with, which is composition, which is not a matter of how organizations relate to us, but how, in relating to us, they might relate to other organizations, right? I'd say that probably the highest goal we could politically arrive at is in the same way that we say, commodities only see commodities, right? Things like that. To say that political organizations could see other political organizations as organizations, which is not how the political ecology relates to itself, right? One party doesn't see an autonomous movement as an organization that has different features because it's starting from a different place with different challenges. It just sees it as whatever is not the right way to do things. So it's one step after analysis, because it's not like just trying to give a different sense of things to an organization in relating to us, but it's trying to intermediate the connection between two things which are not us, right? and facilitate that where it is possible. That's, let's say, a compositional thing. I don't think we ever done that on purpose. I think we're trying now in Rio to move in that direction. We were discussing how to connect organizations amongst each other and chain them and connect them and so on. But I'd say that at least from where I'm standing, I'm not sure what you guys think, I see those four things as separate things, you know? And I think you could think the book in all those terms. It can affect people's sensibilities. It definitely has a teaching component of knowledge and so on. Harder that the book by itself would have an analytic effect in that very vague sense I meant, but surely it can help for people to contact us and allow this to happen, right? And it can also serve as a step in allowing for compositional things. For example, an example of this, which is concrete, is that we just had an event, a conference, where you, without the text that we sent to people, you know, and a text that could be commented by Workers' Party militants, autonomists, you know, people from other movements and so on, if the text wasn't that kind of Rosetta Stone object, they wouldn't be connected. They wouldn't spontaneously be in the same room. So that's a text serving as a means to allow for very, very small composition. That's doable, right? That can happen. So I don't know, to be like even more like precise, I'd say that these are kind of, at least for me today, how I see four kind of levels in which whatever it is we manage to do, we could probably evaluate or direct or connected objectives kind of thing.
Yeah, I really like all those levels. The only thing I wanted to say to add, particularly on like the last two, would be, and this does kind of, I guess, tie back to the sensibility and education level, which would be, I would want, like, it would be great if everyone that could did reach out to us, but I would also like to see the kind of, I guess, almost blueprint for what it means to set up something like STP. I would like if folks get our book and don't have anything else by which to organize from, that at least there would be the idea of something like STP that could perform the functions we're doing, and at least like a general mapping of that. But yeah, with all that in mind, I really like all the levels and stuff.
Yeah, it's also these four levels are, just to go back to that, it's like they're not linear, right? You don't need to necessarily affect sensibility or teach someone something in order to affect composition, and vice versa. You might be able to teach something or learn something from the group, but not actually have a compositional change or analytic effect.
Yeah.
So yeah, these four levels are kind of like independent, right? Or
yeah, I think it can be even conflictual. Like, definitely, if you're trying to produce an analytic effect, you need to work in the language of the organization that is describing a movement. You cannot work on, hey guys, okay, so there is this diagram, and the diagram comes from kind of like, that's totally alien. That's not going to do anything, right? So I think that there is even conflict between like teaching and this more immanent mediative function, right? And perhaps even the three of them, like if you want to combine organizations, you don't want, or compose them, you don't want people to engage too much with STP, right? They shouldn't think that we have the key to whatever they're looking. They should look at some other political process and increase their interest in a third party, not on us. So if we boost ourselves and place ourselves in, you know, the position of you know, come to us, that might even get in the way of that. So not only do I think they are independent, but they are, because they're independent, they can even be in conflict with one another, you know, if not thought through carefully. So it's very interesting to think about that, right? I mean, and also sensibility sometimes gets in the way of teaching, because you think you already got the vibe, so you don't want to understand the details, right? So all of them, I think, can be in conflict with each other, but they also are independent enough that you don't need to go through all of them. But I do think that I can see a book playing part in any of those things. Also, just to sorry, yeah, go Joe, go ahead.
No, please follow up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say something kind of basic also, but I think it's important. Like, honestly, think we should, you know, I think what we're doing, the proper timeline of duration is like 10 years gonna take to get something out of all of this. I don't think it's like next year. Nothing's gonna happen next year. And I think that once you put into that context that it's a slow, there's too much stuff to do. There are too many things we have no idea of. There's too many people we still need to listen to, too many fields we still need to engage with, and so on. Whatever it is that we publish next year is gonna be like just the thing. It's not gonna be the thing. You know, I think if we turn it into this, finally we're gonna publish this huge volume that is gonna settle everything. I don't think we're ever gonna do it. You know, I think that approaching it as a tactical thing that is a means to ends, and the end is to continue to exist for another 10 years, you know, and to do that, we need to exist in multiple languages. We need to decentralize research. We need to become more legitimate in the eyes of others so we can engage them and bring them in and to discuss and develop. I think to approach it tactically rather than as the end all of what we're doing is going to make it easier also, you know, because some decisions are going to be like, fuck, am I going to put this in a book? It's not done. I know it's not a finished idea. It's not a conclusive idea. It's not a consensual idea, but it's better to have something out, even to criticize later on, you know, than to wait and say we're going to just put it on paper when we have the final version of things and never do it because it's just too much, you know. While we don't get a strong communist party to finance it. So, hey, China, if you're listening through Zoom, hit me up. That's true. Yeah.
Elias Jabor, please come to SCP.
Yeah. Well, the bank of BRICS doesn't want to, you know, finance our clearly global South based commie think tank. I mean, we need to hold on, right? Yeah. So just saying that. Yeah, John. Sorry.
No, not at all. And in fact, could you just give me the names of the four again?
I called it like the first would be something like a sensibility change.
Sensibility. That's what I forgot. Okay.
Yeah, there might be some famous philosophical triad or quartet of concepts to fit there.
So we've got.
It's beauty. It's the beautiful first.
So we've got
then
sensibility.
The true, then the good.
You don't want me to start talking about this right now, Gabriel? Because I will. We've got sensitivity. We've got education. We've got organization to organization contacts, and then the most aspirational is the reproduction of relations between organizations. Is that right?
Yeah, I think, yeah, something like that, yeah.
So I have not thought about it in this way before. I just want to pose the question, this might be too optimistic, of whether something you already said overcomes the independence problem here. So I take it that you're saying that these things are independent. If we have them in the wrong proportions, at least they are capable of conflicting. Maybe your view is more pessimistic than that. They're just going to conflict. There is always opportunity cost here. I don't know. But what would you think of the proposal that your idea of a problem is already the key to finding and keeping things within the right proportion? I remember one of the first things that struck me when I first showed up to a meeting here, and I don't mean to pin you to this, it may have just been a toss-off remark, it may have been something you say all the time, I don't know, was that SDP isn't solving the problems of capitalism, it's solving the problems of communism. And that stuck with me. And I think what people in other serious organizations will be best served by understanding, if they put in the time to look at a book, is what an STP problem is, what an STP question is. And I don't mean that in the vague pseudo-Socratic sense, not at all. I mean, for people to have a clear idea, what are they working on? Where have they been? What problems are they trying to solve? And it seems to me that in order to come up with a gestalt of what an SDP question is, you actually need all four of those levels or dimensions that you were talking about. You need to know the theoretical background if you're going to know what these people are working on, what an SDP problem in specific is. You need the sensibility, of course, and probably you need, even though this is challenging, something as close to a case study as possible to see what they've done with it. Those, I think, are all necessary to convince people that that there is a definable project that can be interfaced with in an organized way. And really, I guess I would suggest that is that draws the right kind of institution to institution or group to group contacts that you're thinking of. And I say the right ones, right? Because you already drew a distinction between other kinds of groups that just sort of come because they're contact you because they're interested in your theoretical perspective or something like that. This new 2023 phenomenon that you pointed to seems to be one of people who have problems recognizing that STP works on those problems. They don't just have them, they don't just suffer from them, but they, to an extent we do, of course, but we're working on those problems. Yeah, I'm rambling a bit. That's all I've got. I would want to come away from this book understanding what an STP problem is, seeing that it is capable of producing something, and perhaps inspiring the reproduction of that method. But as you say, that's the most aspirational.
You wanna compliment that, Gabriel?
Yeah, no, I just want to say real quick. First, I totally agree. I mean, I think that if we look, because this is not a future thing, this is a past thing, right? We can apply this to ourselves. Like, generally speaking, people who stick with STP for a longer time usually have been shaped by some sensibility that there is something to be sorted out that hasn't been sorted out. That's not obvious and it's not, widespread. So I mean, though it's very varied, really varied in terms of like political engagement, I do think that some level of either difficulty engaging, for example, we had a really interesting paper, really commentary on our text from Cassia in our event here in Rio, where the core of her comment was, yeah, I have an issue with the very idea of engaging with organizations. There's something that's itself a problem. And I think that's absolutely a relevant entry point that already touches on something which is part of this sensibility, right, issue. Like, you don't need to view organizations as a relevant topic just because you are organized and something happened and you think, well, the organizational point of view is relevant to even framing that problem. Having a difficulty organizing in itself can be share of the same sensibility, right? We all have had some level of engagement with some previous material that was being discussed in the group, otherwise nobody would even come. And a lot of justifications that people say why they came to the group is, I want to see where this research is going, I want to follow it up, I want to understand it better, so the educational side is also there. I think that the analytic point is also part of what we do. We're constantly, arriving at a later moment, then looking back at what happened in STP and trying to produce a different view than the view we had at the time that those things were happening. So clearly, this is also what's happening here. And I think the compositional issue is, self-evident, because people here are coming from different political lives that are not necessarily compatible in their premises, and it's not like we all had the same type of political engagement. So clearly, we also managed to do that sort of work. And I even, in fact, it's something I only realized very recently, that you can even explain in our own terms how the group works, because probably if we weren't a heterogeneous group, it would be easier to coalesce around a particular political position, right? Because if we all agreed, we all came from the same political background, the chances that we would just see a particular political strategy and say, yeah, that's obviously the line everyone should be taking. But that doesn't happen because the group is too heterogeneous for that. To do that would mean to sidetrack somebody from the group and say, whatever you think is not relevant. So even in our own structure, that's already happening, right? That the way the group is structured does produce an effect on how the group sees political processes. And so I think that those four things are already at play in what we do. And just to conclude, once we get to discuss the skeleton, whatever we should be putting in the book, which I think we should probably take a break, and then after Rafael speaks and then do that. I think that this might also have a consequence on style, not only on the style of writing, as we were already talking, in terms of who are we going to address. I think the style of the address of the book, as we've been doing with the texts, has already been pretty interesting. It does seem to get to people. Very few people have said, once they actually sat down to read the text, that they are hermetic or difficult for difficult sake, right? So I think that we do have an interesting style, but it might be worth discussing if the book shouldn't have a slightly different form as a book to be able to allow for these four components to be present somehow. Meaning, if you know that you're trying to produce a book that people can use to build connections, not only should we probably, focus on having some case studies, as John was saying, that might be very relevant for a book, so that you can have material for people to debate, but potentially to have a book that is structured in a way that is more inviting for these things to happen, even to the point of, being more inviting for people who read the book to engage with some forum, like to have a QR code for our now fully functional Discord group for whoever wants to join, and then it's a public separate thing. Things like that don't allow the book to become an end in itself, or at least open the door for it to serve as a means, So I think that that's also a discussion to be had. I don't think it's obvious that a political book today should just have the format of a textbook with ideas. Perhaps there is another format that we could try.
I just wanted to add, and I think it's good so that we take a 10-minute break. I agree. I just wanted to. Well, I think you've all said it, but I think there's something that's important that also connects with the last thing that Gabriel said, which is I think there's going to be, we have to have these 2 points of view. What we want the book to be in this series, which involves, I think, those four elements, which I think recalls to what an STP problem is. And I think this is really important in getting through. And I think this will also help lighten the load, I think, on the element of thinking that we need to present something that is fully closed, fully finished, in the sense that every idea is developed, not only because there are things that we take a while to develop, but I also think that there are some problems, some ideas, some types of connections that we will never get to if we don't do this first step in trying to map out what we know, what we think we know, what we think might be, and what we don't know, you know? I think this is something that's important when we look at the skeleton, because there are lots of things, and I think it would be very interesting if we could try and transmit that in the book, that there are some core ideas which in a sense we are very set on. There are some stuff that we are working on. We think that it's a matter of deriving more stuff, or you know, connecting some stuff. There are some stuffs that we are trying out, and there's stuff that we don't know, you know. I think also this sense of unfinishedness, not in an artistic sense, you know, but in the sense that there are problems that we will only get a better grasp on when we do these steps. And I think it's something that, you know, when we look at the skeleton, when we think of the finished work, it could be something also that we could keep in mind, you know, because I think that these are ways to try and touch also these different levels of connections that we are aiming at, especially if, as many people are talking here, many people are saying, in a sense, there is the goal, the shared goal to have this space, to have the book as a tool for connecting, you know. So I think that this might be something to have in mind when we work on the skeleton. So do we take like a 5-minute break or 10 minutes?
I'm up for 5, so we don't go too late.
Yeah, I'd prefer 5 also.
Okay, so be right back.
Okay, so see you all in 5.
Hello, friends.
Hey Reza, we're taking a 5-minute break to get to the second part of the meeting. Just to give you an overview of what happened, we started discussing moving away from WhatsApp as our primary tool for communication. It's been an idea that's circulating around for a while, and now John, Rafael, and John Bova are all preparing for us to migrate to Discord, which is a better equipped forum. And the idea is that once we migrate, we remove WhatsApp, and that's the main official contact for us, because it's going to make it easier to find old conversations, keep track of things. So that was the first part. Then we start. Sorry, yeah.
We tried that with the other platform for a while.
Yeah,
I
but it didn't
remember,
have a
but,
good Zoom. It didn't have a good chat tool.
yeah.
So and a lot of people already use Discord, and you can have video on it. So we could even stop using Zoom, perhaps. And so there was that. Sorry, Eduardo.
So the new tool is which one?
Discord.
Discord. Okay.
I have just a short doubt. We were talking about how we decide about the entering into Discord, and I was a little bit confused. Are we gonna wait the persons that enter the server to go in a couple of meetings, or how do we decide to send them the link so they can join the Discord?
I think John can say more, but what I understood is that we expect people to come to meetings before, just like we do with WhatsApp today. Like, just to have some engagement before they are on Discord. So it's not the first thing. So you come to the meetings, we talk, and we get to see the person, and then I think it can be like one, depends, right? I mean, I think we're going with the feels, not necessarily like a strict thing.
Yeah, just real quick on that, y'all. Like, that's one of the things we explicitly said we need to talk as a group about next meeting. We don't have an answer, and I'd like to not just
Okay,
come
sorry.
up with the answer. Yeah, no,
I
that's
didn't
fine.
know
I'm
if
just
you
saying, like,
defined it or not. I didn't know if it was defined or not. Just
oh
that.
no, that's fine. All I'm saying is, like, I'd like to give it the time it's due next week. We definitely know that it's not a solved problem. It's objectively vague, not just letting you know. But yeah, let's those are all things we want to clarify as a group next week.
And what is the next topic?
So after I'm just summarizing, right? After that, we started already the discussion of potential book project, collective book project for STP. But rather than going to the details of it, which we're going to do now, we just had like a bigger discussion about what people expect from a book that we would work on. And then that derived, like, changed into a discussion about more broadly, what are, let's say, political goals of STP. And we settled, just for now, on a kind of 4 parts or 4 strands of ways that people can get transformed, let's say, by what we do. There's, let's say, the sensibility issue, where people can just acquire a slightly different sensibility for politics by engaging. There is the educational side, where you can learn things, a matter of knowledge, right? There's also the analytic side, where it's a matter of engagement we get with other organizations, where in a kind of, by being a mediator to what they have to say about their own political processes, we can help them see those processes in a different light. This has already happened. We did this a couple of times, and it seems like something we could pursue. So it has a kind of analytic flavor. So it's not a matter of teaching content, teaching theory. It's not a matter of individually getting people caught up in a particular way of seeing things. They can still see as they did. They can still know exactly what they knew. But by coming in engagement with STP, perhaps the political processes they are part of might be seen in a different light. And then there's the fourth, which is compositional, meaning not so much how they connect to us, but how through that they might connect to other organizations, third parties, right? And compose the political scene in a new way. So sensibility education, this analytic mediation, and a kind of compositional one, right? So we were thinking, well, the book should probably be seen in light of these objectives. It can change or help change how people see politics. It can have an educational, more classic transfer of knowledge kind of thing, but it can also be a means to facilitate further analytic connections in the future. So make ourselves a potential addressee of groups, right? And it can also serve as a means for, through this process, get organizations to connect with others. But most of these objectives, it's quite clear that the book is a means to something that is not book-like. It's not a means for further books, right? It's a means to continue this engagement with research, with organizations, and so on, right? So I think that's where we stopped before you arrived. We were just kind of speculating on this. And now the idea is to go into a bit more detail about a potential book structure, and everything is very
Awesome.
preliminary. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for catching me up. It's good to see you guys. And just wanted to let you know that John, not John Milley, John Bova, is reading my book, and the first comment he made was, your survey of secondary literature is the best I've read. And I said, look, this part is Gabriel's research. So the best thing about my book is the research you did.
No, but it's just because he was in the beginning. It's not, but true. That's funny.
You know, it's a slip on my side. I should have gotten the proper reference of your Portuguese publication and put it in my book. It was a miss on my side. Hopefully we do it in the Portuguese
Yes,
translation.
then it will be already sorted out. But most were in English anyway. Book pages.
Yeah,
and things
but
like
no, I mean, I wrote that piece in English by literally going through your Portuguese writing, and I should have mentioned that in the book,
that. No,
but
don't worry.
I missed it.
Yeah, but it wasn't.
So what I'm saying is that when we do the Portuguese, hopefully Portuguese translation, we will rectify that, especially if it's more important in Portuguese, for Portuguese to know that the original writing is in Portuguese by you.
Man, so don't worry about that, man. It's the only place where that's published anyway. It's not even published. I don't have a reference for those ideas. The document I sent you was like a.
It was a research that you published somewhere, no?
No. It's a project I sent to try a postdoc position.
Oh, I see.
So I never wrote on that. You're the.
So it's,
Yeah. No, but I mean, I'm happy to contribute, and I'm sure as JB further develops, further moves along his reading, he's gonna come back with other comments of the best.
we'll see.
I have no doubt about that.
JB is an astute reader.
He is. So I think everyone's back. We have two documents we can use to try to move along with the with discussing this book project. I mean, I think we still need to stop at some point and see if we're all on board that this is a collective project. I mean, as with everything we do here, we don't necessarily need consensus of everyone, as long as it's not anyone is vetoing, which I think would be absolutely acceptable as well. If somebody says, look, not only don't I want to engage, which is fine, but more than that, I see it as contradictory with what the group is doing. I rather that we don't. I think that's fine. If somebody who is part of STP, wants to veto a project, I think that's generally something we can work around. Also, like, okay, so some people will publish in their own name as a particular interpretation of STP and separate it from it being like the collective thing. So as long as we come to some agreement, which I don't think we have discussed yet, if okay, this is, I think there are different levels of agreement. Like this is something we're okay with a smaller part of the collective doing. This is something we are, so that shouldn't affect which meetings we have, what we discuss in our meetings. We shouldn't sacrifice anything in order to get this done, right? Or not, we can conclude, no, we want to turn this into like something that organizes our year or even further along, because we want to make sure we treated it as a central thing. That's a slightly different decision to take, because it would affect everyone's time in the group, right? If it's a parallel thing, you can engage with it, but if you don't, nothing changes. And if it becomes a central thing, it will affect everyone regardless of whether they want or not. The truth is that even if it becomes something central, chances are that if you're not very engaged with S2P, you're probably not going to feel the difference, but still, I think that's a big difference. So it's something for us to discuss. And then I think also, I mean, once we settle that, should this not be done? Is somebody vetoing it? Should it be done as a parallel thing? Should it become a central guiding thread of our work for the near future or midterm? Then there's a second issue, which is, do we think that this should be approached as something to be built out from zero, or should we use this idea that was the original idea we brought up in the last meeting, which is the intuition that some of us had, especially after the event we organized in Brazil, that we have a skeleton that we can use, right? So that second idea, it implies that we already have something to build on top of. The first idea means we would try to do something from zero. So I think that's a second thing to decide. The document that I have here, I have two documents. One is something I did, I think almost a year ago, where I just compiled a bunch of our stuff that was either published strictly as S2P, or that was S2P adjacent, in the sense that it either was published before and was like building to what we do, or that was published on the side, but it's just pretty much S2P theory being promoted by one of its members, things like that. So it's like a big chunk of material, so we could see if there is a book there. And the other document is more closely related to the second idea, which personally is the one that I'm definitely more in line with. As I said before we went on a break, I don't think we should approach this as we are writing the definite S2P handbook. I think we should approach it as we're writing something useful, but a small stepping stone in something that is going to take many more years to arrive at, something we could call like S2P 1.0. Like if the Atlas was like a beta version, just trying things out with very little resource and so on, we now can start from something slightly ahead, but we're not gonna necessarily start from scratch. So what would make this enticing or a possible project, it's precisely because we are perhaps closer to a book than we thought. I think that to start working on a book, but start from scratch and then try to write everything, I don't think it's tenable in a year or so. I think it's a much longer project. So, but that's a personal position. I think we still need to discuss these two topics, right? Parallel, either veto, parallel, or central, and then from scratch, or if we use this particular skeleton. We did mention these ideas, but I'm not sure what's the consensus around it, or if it's something everyone is on board with. But then, let me just share my screen here. And also I'll share this on the chat. This is the document I just, okay, so actually let me start with the other one. This is the old document. It just has a list, but it's an incomplete list, at the time when I compiled this, I asked for people to add more texts that they thought should be added here. I think that there are quite a few that weren't, so probably the word count would be even longer. But these are the main texts of the collective, and then you always have the word count on the side to get a feel for it, right? So we have three publications and one very long unpublished draft. Contribution to the Critique of Political Organization was the first thing. Then the Primer in Political Phenomenology. I added all the subtitles, subsections as well. Then the Atlas. Then the Working Through Political Organization. And then the draft of what was called Social Atoms and Social Worlds. And just those things together, they're already quite longer than a book. I don't think any publisher would accept something larger than 100,000 words these days for a collective publication of an unknown group. So just to give you guys a feel. And then there's a bunch of other texts that were either published or written or are currently being worked through. And again, it's like 60, 70 plus 1,000 words. So if you were to gather all of this, you would get like 250,000 words, you know, which is way too much. And again, it's not that we want to publish everything, but it's if we wanted to extract a book out of things that were already written or themes to go into a book, you can see in this document, you'll find a bunch of stuff that we could be working on in that direction. But the idea of the skeleton is not either starting from scratch or just picking and choosing from this long list. It's actually starting from two texts. The published one on Crisis and Critique called Working Through Political Organization, right? And the second one, which is the draft that we shared in Portuguese in our little booklet. I don't have one near me now, but we shared in our little booklet called it's the Social Atoms and Social Worlds, minus the introduction. So we just call it Theory of Social Worlds because if you see what's the content of it, it's pretty much just constructing that theory in detail, right? So if you join the word count for both of these things, you have like 40K, around 40,000 words. That's a book, but a small book, right? So what was the idea here is that we have here all the sections in these texts, right? And one possibility of a structure was to consider this like an improved beginning than the one we had on the Atlas. The beginning of the Atlas was, we have one diagram. We know how to dissect this diagram into particular problems. And then we invited as many people from the collective as possible to either write new texts because with their private interests of research matched one of those slices, or add already existing text that they already had to the Atlas because we could also fit by using that Rosetta Stone to connect and translate things across. But it was just the diagram. This time we have like not so much a kind of universal ports that you can connect many things to it, but we actually have something like a skeleton. And a better metaphor would be like, adding meat and organs to something, I think, because if we do use this as the basis, I think what we would be talking about is like, do we expand a certain subsection? Or, for example, here we could say, well, but this thing here is not only a matter of expanding, we could add a new subsection, right, below it, like this. And then I want to write something that goes here, develop this point further and connect it to something else. Or I want to, focus on center and periphery and develop this concept. Or I want to add a whole section on something that is connected to this, but it's a slightly different topic, right? So this way we're creating, like giving more meat to the skeleton rather than just trying to build something from the ground up, right? I think that the motivation for bringing this idea up now was that once we put the little booklet together, it seemed pretty clear that we're closer to having a complete readable, transmissible book than we thought by using these two texts as the basis, right? I'm not sure if I have here, just to show, probably do. Yeah, I think this is the, just to give you guys a sense for people who weren't here in the last meeting. This is the booklet that we, see if I can, that we printed and shared. It's in Portuguese, but if you look, this first part here, 63 pages long. It's the point of view of political organization, which is how we translated the working through political organization text. This whole thing here, which is again 50, 60 pages long, is the theory of social worlds. Then we added like a dictionary of diagrams. So it's something I know Rafael liked very much. We added at the end. If you go here, you'll see it's like this. You have, for every diagram, you have a small explanation at the bottom. See, like 2 paragraphs at most explaining the diagram that you're looking at. So you get like a dictionary of these things, right? And then after this, we added like an explanation of STP, it's links to how it works, everything that we're currently doing, our current projects, our current publications, and even a map of our WhatsApp structure. So you see, again, the book was meant to serve as a means for people to see, to find STP more approachable and to come to the group or to connect us to their organizations and so on. It was not just thought of as a regular book. But again, I'm saying all of this because it did feel, once we looked at this on paper, like, okay, clearly there are a lot of gaps. Clearly there are a lot of things we could develop, and probably we wouldn't want a finalized book to be published without it. But it's very much along the way. We probably don't need to start from scratch, you know? So I'm just saying this to give further credence to why the skeleton hypothesis is probably better than the start from scratch idea. Yeah, John.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. I think one thing in terms of this idea of like, this is not the book, but just one more book, is like, I think one thing we're trying to build out of this is like a workflow as much as like an actual text. We're trying to set up the way that we're going to continue to make texts and continue to make interventions. And so I guess this kind of goes back to the initial question of like, what do you want out of this book? That would be another thing I'd want out of, is for us to further streamline our workflow, because that's been, you know, something we're still obviously experimenting with. But first off, just that's awesome. The everything you just showed that you did down in Brazil is great. And actually, like, what you did at the very end there at the WhatsApp and the STP is very much in line with what I'd like to see. Because again, even if they can't reach out to us, you see right there a kind of model of what kind of structures you need or the kind of ideas. Obviously, you can do your own thing, but it helps to start. And with that in mind, like I just want to make a general case for the skeleton, because I think in order to build a workflow, you have to just kind of be willing to take what you're already working on, do the best you can, and then let it go, and then move on. Like, we can't be too kind of like, I mean, you've already said all this, so I won't reiterate it, but so I think the skeleton's good. I think one way we can kind of continue to build on what you all did in Brazil would be, I'd like to see maybe like less text and more diagrams or images throughout the overall publication, even to the point of maybe like commissioning some artists to have some like artistic renderings of what we mean by ecologies or whatever. I mean, we could get crazy with it, but actually having it be a little bit more aesthetically coordinated, where maybe like we have different placements of the text over time. We use sidebars and all those kind of like interesting formatting options, for 2 reasons. One, I think we're a very visual, I mean, obviously we're very visual diagrammatic, so I think building that in more and continue to develop that formatting aesthetic is good. But also, I think it tends to encourage a more non-linear approach to text when they're kind of more image oriented, so you kind of open up and you kind of navigate them. And I think that might be helpful to a lot of readers, is not to feel like you have to start in point A and get through to point C, but that you can actually kind of like jump into different parts of the text, get something useful. And to get really crazy with that idea, we could go the old like Wittgenstein numeration route and actually like have little references to other parts of the book with like a 1.1.1 blah 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 blah, so that someone that's interested in one idea can then see where it links to multiple other ideas in the book and kind of jump around.
I just wanted to say something on that. I mean, I think a really good discussion, if we go forward with this, I think a discussion on, okay, if we're adapting the style, if we're going to be a bit more experimental with the form, what would that look like? Personally, for example, I don't think enumeration would cut it. We tried it with the primer. I have the impression that I like the spirit of that, but I probably think we should have like a discussion only about that. Also because, I mean, publishing houses have their constraints, right? So what they would accept, we would also have to consider. Also, as a parenthesis, a friend of mine, Nadia, she's having a meeting with Verso today, and she's already asking them, would you be interested? You guys know about STP? So I think we can, she's starting a lobby, and I think we could potentially get Verso to publish. Which it's not obviously the best thing, to be a very, 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 very candid about it. I'm not sure if it's what we need, but it's still, I think that the formatting and those things, that the discussion about that probably would merit like a longer discussion. Also, I think we should start, if we go forward with this, I think we should start looking for examples. Like, what is, you know, what is an example of what we want? Like, is this out there somehow? What is, you know, a book that has that structure that we, or a book that doesn't have that structure, but has some structure we find appealing and we would like to start from, right? Yeah. I was also going to say something else. I forgot what it was. Yeah, whatever. I'll remember it later.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that what was I going to say? Yeah, I guess I want to say that I wanted to that I have the impression that the structure we tried out with the book in Portuguese worked, and I think because I mean, again, I think I agree, we're not trying to consolidate the theoretical system. I think we're trying to get people interested and curious, and starting from the thesis, I think was the best way to motivate people. And I think there is an arch in the structure, which I think we can still improve, which is starting from the conjunctural thesis and somehow motivating up until we get into the main ideas, the sort of like grammatical ideas. And I think what can do the middle ground is the concept of social words, because it is where you define what vulgarization is, for example, already in the grammar, sorry, of organizational trinitarianism, complex social worlds, and so on. So you get to formalize the intuition of vulgarization, which I think it speaks a lot to people. I mean, but already in the idea of alignment and so on. So I think there's an arch there. And the second thing is, I also wonder about the thing. Let me just paste something, because I think that we should discuss more what's the status of the diagrams in this text, because I think that's the main, on one hand, is the thing that makes us recognizable, right? In the event, like, people sort of like know us as the people who like diagrams. So that's something good, but already the main thing that makes people sort of like have second doubts and you know, being doubt of whether they should put the effort or trying to understand because it looks like maths. And so I think the idea of that John said of trying to find out other illustrations, other ways to sort of like illustrate. I have a friend that just read the text today and he said working through the diagrams was very hard. So I think we could do like like a sort of like illustration and equivalent diagrammatic form. Like we can have some sort of dual language that follows throughout the book, or that gets, you know, like that book from on the how to bake the pie.
Pie.
Yeah, this kind of where you
Pie is
use
not food.
intermediate. Yeah, where you use intermediate sort of like diagrams. Something between a drawing and a diagram. So I think that's one thing we should focus. And the third thing is also I wonder whether there should be something, but I don't know if just something I wonder, something more on what is the concept of like what militancy or like what political activity is, like what's our methodology, because we have some fragmented ideas about that, right? What, for example, like a translation of the modes into like political dimensions of political activity, like something that relates, because I think people get the feeling that we're doing right something as is a grammar, that we're not giving a particular pathway, we're giving a grammar, but I think we still could have something to say about the concrete sort of like political work. Even, I mean, if our challenge is this goes through this 4 dimensions that we talked, that Gabriel listed, then that should be transitive to like they could be sort of like general dimensions of political work. So if as Dennis said, this is part of the communist transition, they should also work at the scale of political activity. So yeah, just saying that I wonder if there should be a part that sort of like we go from the conjuncture thesis up to the ideas and then come back as how this concrete political work appears from the standpoint of the grammar. I mean, this is just a speculative comment. So yeah, one thing is the arch that I think I like it. The second is a care we have to have with the diagrams not being the thing that keeps us, put people sort of like a distance, but actually spark their curiosity and turn this thing on political work.
Yeah, just continuing what Renzo was saying, just for adding more evidence there is the first question we got when we presented to the Communist Caucus was around like how we saw our theories playing out in organizational matters, right? The actual like case studies and things like that. So I think making that more of a core part of the book is always better, especially if we hand this book to a organizer. We probably want to say like go to this chapter if you want to see how this like see how we analyze like a particular situation, right? So the concrete aspect is a bridge for us to, you know, some people might just, you know, start on that rather than the diagrams. But the thing I wanted to bring up has to do with earlier comment John made about non-linear formats. And then Gabriel, you were talking about how the primer was structured. And we also did it in the atlas as well, right? The atlas kind of has this hyperlink structure where we reference all the text together. But I was thinking we could have an online version of the book as well, because it's really easy to, you know, because the web is already hyperlinked. So it could be really easy to make it searchable you could have like audio visual elements really easily embedded and yeah, so and then you would have hyperlinks as well. So I think it would be good to have both at some point, especially if you want to experiment with the non-linear thing. I think at some point it becomes a bit counterproductive in a book format, the non-linear thing. I mean, I think it worked for the Atlas, but yeah, I guess it really depends on how when we're handing this book to someone, how are we telling them how to read it, you know, because if it requires like a big essay on how to read this book, I think a lot of people might not want to put in that time. And they would prefer a more linear thing. But yeah, I think that we should have another meeting to discuss that.
I think there are some good points that you guys mentioned. I just want to comment on them, and before I say what I wanted to say initially, I think the good thing is regarding what Renzo said is that we already did some case studies, so I think that's not something that's so out of the loop for us. You know, we did this in the Atlas. We had three case studies. And something that I remembered, but I think was forgotten, we actually did do one of the things that we said after the Atlas that we wanted to focus on was case studies. So I don't think that's too far off from how we will see the project. You know, I think we can integrate case studies, but also I don't think it would be too weird to have a part of the book that is dedicated to different case studies where we get to see the theory being enacted in different situations. And you know, I think I tend to agree a bit with what Dennis said about the difficulties of having the instructions. You know, I don't know. I think linearity, the way that the thing might grow, is interesting. It might be important, the structure, you know. I mean, people can read book chapters separately, even if books are linear. So I think, you know, people can just check out the chapters they want. People do that. So I don't think that's something that we have to strive for. And I think that would put a really high bar for us, because we'd have to, you know, think about the project in a weird totality that might end up, you know, making us even more lost in the way. Yeah, I totally agree. Linearity is soothing. I love that. But what I wanted to say is, because I think we have to get back to this before we start discussing the text, I think it'd be interesting, it'd be important to say if we want this to be central, if we want this to be parallel. And, you know, I think from the vibes, I think most people, at least those who have commented, seem to think I just saw the wiki idea. I think most people seem to be in agreement about the skeleton, but I think we still have to confirm that. And I think it really be important also to decide the centrality, because I do think that, I don't know if it was John who said that, I got lost a bit, but I do think it would be a way to incorporate folks who might otherwise be outside of the process. Yeah, so I think it's a good idea. I mean, it's something that we can get a clear view where we're going. I mean, it's something that would give us a bit of a focus as a group. It would be a different experience, because the Atlas, we were focused on the Atlas, but it was like a two max 3 months, right? I don't remember exactly. It was all a blur. 2 months. So it was all a blur. And as Gabriel remembered, you know, we had a lot of texts that were already finished but were related. We had one Rosetta Stone. So I think this would be a different experience, you know, growing from the skeleton. I agree also with the idea of the workflow, and I think in a sense that's good for this being central. But I think, and just to leave on this note, I think it's important that we don't equate what happens in this process with, you know, STP workflow in general, because, you know, if our workflow involves churning out a book, it doesn't seem like a good workflow. You know, I think there are other types of workflow that we also need to get accustomed to, which is, you know, smaller groups publishing, or even individual people publishing, but related to the collective. You know, it's something that happens, of course, already, but I think we have to think of this as one of the possible forms of writing in STP, but not the form, because man, it's a lot of pressure if for us to write a certain type of book, you know. Of course, that brings other problems, which is how do we connect stuff if people are, you know, connecting loosely, writing apart, you know. But I think that's what the meetings are for. That's what discussions are for, you know. So I think it's something we can deal with. But just to get back on the central point, I think we need to see if people think this is a central project or parallel project, or veto. But I don't think anybody's gonna veto. Maybe this is just peer pressure on my part.
No, I agree with. I'm not even sure we can. There's quite a lot of people today in the meeting, but I wonder if, again, just for a common practice, we haven't been deciding these things in meetings. We're deciding them usually on WhatsApp. So I wonder if we should not, I mean, just agree to bring it to WhatsApp for a week for people to vote, or not, if we should already strive to find some level of consensus here. But just some things that were brought up.
I think we have enough people to have consensus here. Just a suggestion. I think like we have like a good quorum here, but if you guys prefer to take it back to the group, I think that's good as well.
Yeah, because my main issue with deciding it now, though, I mean, I think I would feel okay with deciding something parallel now, because being parallel means that we wouldn't need everyone's vote, right? But I have the impression that just because we've done this in the past, it would be strange not to do it now, of taking it to WhatsApp. But anyway, we can talk about that. Just a couple of things. One thing that I worry a bit about, I think these are very, very interesting discussions, and I agree we should worry about them. The diagram issue, the politics issue of concrete prescription and so on. But I think that those are issues that it's not a coincidence that every time we talk about talking and engaging with others who are not in the group, they come back. Like, because it's a demand, we're demanded to do these things, right? And I think that generally it's not a good thing to answer to demands in order to make sure we're more seductive, we get to people. We should take them into consideration, but I think the best example of a reader we have, the best example of an audience that we have, are people in the group, right? Because everyone who is in the group was at some point outside of the group, and everyone who is currently inside the group probably felt at some point that they were actually outside. So we have enough of an outside inside to guide us. Whereas if we just invent some reader based on some comments from outside and we try to adapt to those, there's a small chance that we either get into an infinite demand that we were never satisfied into meeting, you know, or that we let go of something which is in itself hard. I mean, there is some truth to the fact that there hasn't been a lot of political prescription in the group. We've resisted to doing that for some reason, and there's some truth to that. Just as there is some truth to the fact that, you know, getting less, you don't need to like the diagrams, but getting less afraid of the idea that mathematics is relevant to these discussions is part of what we do. So though I'm not against like toning down or considering these things and in many different ways. I do think that we need to have like a kind of ambivalent relation to the things we feel like the hoops we feel we need to come to jump through in order to arrive at people. You know, I think that ultimately what's going to make us arrive at more people is organization. There's no key magic word, magic way of talking that gets across. We're going to get across because we're constantly there. We're going to get across because we are there in a way that is concrete. You know, I think most people who, when they meet us, they ask, why is there too much mathematics? And why is there why aren't you telling me what to do? If you stay with them for long enough, and if you don't let go, and if you create the means to engage in other ways, those two demands tend to empty out quite a bit. You know, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive to find out what to do politically, or that we might be making bad judgments about where diagrams are needed and where they're not. So those demands definitely are legitimate in many ways, but I do think that taking them with a grain of salt is relevant, and not because of something in my head or an intuition, but because of the history of the collective has shown that we can accommodate this in different ways. So that's the first thing. I mean, again, I think if we have a meeting only about the form, style, structure of the book, the discussion about where does mathematics go into that could fit into that discussion, right? There are many ways. I think what John suggested, substituting sometimes where diagrams are not necessary for more visual, intuitive ways, you know, and then having footnotes, or leaving mathematics always to an appendix so that you strive to keep texts clean. And if people want to see kind of the engine of some of the ideas, they can see an appendix for every chapter or sections, and then you get a bit more of that. Like, there are many ways to solve that, but again, I would just take it with a certain grain of salt. I think that also affects the discussion of form. Like, I agree that we had this problem with the Atlas, and I don't think it's for nothing that at the time that we were doing the Atlas, we also thought of creating a wiki. I remember Dennis and I wrote a bunch of entries to this wiki, and it never caught on. We did think about turning the Atlas into a more interactive website, using the diagram as something that would actually, you know, network the texts into like a non-linear thing. But clearly, like, you're working against the book form, which is linear by the nature of writing in the Western world and by the numbering of pages. So that gets in the way, right? So whatever we decided, I think that, and also by yeah, I wouldn't focus. I think that's a totally separate project, like interactive websites, and I don't know. But I'm just saying that we tried that, we thought about that, and then there's also the publication thing. Like, if we were like Bruno Latour wrote a book, and then he said, there's a website that goes with the book that's an interactive website. You can even access it today. It's like modesofexistence.whatever, right? Still exists, modesofexistence.org. It has the book, and you can access like in a non-linear dictionary of whatever. But he's Bruno Latour, like Duke Press was fine with that, right? Funded by the EU, exactly. Like, we're no one. So why would a small leftist publishing house, and Verso is a small leftist publishing house, for example, but even others want to fund something that is riskier? So I just don't want to make sure we don't go down the rabbit hole of crazy form and then get caught up, you know? Then the other thing that goes into the direction of not necessarily trying to answer a demand and trusting, let's say, that the first readers are the people in the group. I really feel strongly about this idea that I think we could use very, very nicely. If this is a central project, it would work even better, which is to present this for a vote in the group, to have a blessing, as Renzo said, with the following principle. Evidently, not everyone is going to be able to write an entry for the like a new subsection. But besides writing sections, which of course can be done collectively as well, but besides writing sections, there is the absolutely necessary work of revising everything and not just revising in the sense of correcting the wording, but revising in the sense that the first people we know who are interested on S2P but are not acquainted with it are a good part of the group, for people who are still getting acquainted, still trying to understand and want an introduction to the ideas themselves. So this allows the book to double as, let's say, our first, let's say, formation course, you know, training course on S2P ideas for ourselves. Because if we put as revisers the people who feel least acquainted with the material, the people who have more doubts, the people who have questions, and so on, we'll by writing the book and answering to the revision issues that are raised, we will also be, you know, bringing everyone up to speed at the same time and testing the ideas internally. So I'd say that I think that that's the first readers and the first demands that I would kind of respect and try to steer the project towards, rather than demands that come from outside. Though I agree that, I mean, if there's one thing in the skeleton that I think is lacking, and I think that though I'm not clear, like perhaps it could even be split into two projects, is the case studies, because I could definitely also see something like a longer project where we're trying to get this shorter book off the ground so that we can have a stronger decentralized engagement with a bunch of organizations. And from that engagement, we expect good case studies to come forward that are not just, you know, small examples that we put in the book to make sure people accept that we already did our political share. Like, we want the political thing to happen for real. So imagine if we could get a second publication where, using that first book, we managed to get other people to read it, to engage with us in an enduring way. Potentially, we would have to have already like a more decentralized structure with subgroups in different places that meet in different times. You know, like, you could imagine this as a longer thing. But if we say no, this is too much, the first thing I would think that we could imagine how to add is either one case study that is very detailed and we work through it through the whole book, you know, or a couple, you know, but definitely that would be probably the thing that I think it's lacking the most. And last, but also connected to that, as I said, I think that this is personally where I see the book having the largest effect. Like, if we have a book and it condenses in a clear way a lot of our ideas, and in the process of writing it, more people in the group feel like they are in touch with those ideas, that facilitates profoundly the chances that we can decentralize the group. Because even if we don't all meet on a Monday meeting, or even if the Monday meeting is spread out in different languages, or, you know, people are trying to create more groups or separate groups that can be more autonomous, we now would have something concrete. We know that if we reference through it, if we try to translate what we're doing in our own autonomous group through that book, it will connect back to a larger composite. So we will be assured of an invariance, so it's easier to vary, right? For me, that's, let's say, the fundamental kind of assessment that, or outcome I'd like this project to have for us. Internally, to bring this kind of condensing and revising or training process, because we could all be working together and we would have a concrete reason to ask questions and to answer questions. And then the outcome, well, now we have something invariant, we can vary even further and potentially even turn this idea of like prescriptive things, case studies, which are much more dense in variety, right? Like, I find it hard to imagine that we could come up with a consensual idea of something prescriptive to do politically. So many different contexts, different realities, so on, different political aspirations. So once we have that invariant thing, I think it's easier to vary, to decentralize, to have like different threads happening at the same time. So yeah, to summarize, I would say these two things. Like, I'd be a bit wary of how we try to answer to demands from others, which doesn't mean that they are not pointing to real things, but I think we have enough difficulty and resistance inside the group to focus on that as an orientation principle to what goes on paper. And second, I think that, you know, putting people who are not that comfortable with the material in the position of revisers and aiming to use the book writing as a process of also engaging the group with the theory and having an outcome, which is an invariance that facilitates decentralization. Those to me are like core things, you know. If we can have EU money to do this, or Brit money, nothing against that.
All right, that's it's a great place to jump off from. Because
هممون چیزایی که خوردیم هم سردی بوده. این من دوباره آب ریختم.
Reza, could you mute yourself, please?
Sorry about that.
All right, cool. Thank you. So yeah, so just to riff off of that, like, yeah, I totally agree that probably like the main accomplishment of this will be to help to simultaneously kind of bring a lot of things together and tie together and also decentralize in the same process, I'm hoping, which is why I'm an advocate for the central approach to this. I think it makes a lot of sense, especially for the timing we're at right now. Like, I'd feel differently if our schedule was full. I'd feel differently if we did have a bunch of stuff that people were antsy to present, but like, we are in this moment where we have some space and some availability, and that it in itself indicates something. I think in light of that, there's just a few things is in terms of timing. First off, I think that we can really use this project in particular to kind of help drive building the momentum on Discord, because if we start it next week, we can really just begin the discussion there, really move into it. So think like using this project to help drive that would be good. Secondly, while I agree, Rafael, that I do think that, like, obviously we need to separate the overall workflow from this. I do think this would be an opportunity. There are times to kind of call all hands on deck, and I do think this might be one of those times, because very much like Gabriel was saying, I think it will help kind of concentrate, clarify, and decentralize in one process. And I think it'll be a good opportunity. Just like, I mean, honestly, like part of, as my understanding was, since I wasn't involved, part of the world systems text, it wasn't just like theoretical disagreements. It was running up to obstacles of the how of carrying out the text and of the interactions between how the text was broken up. So like, we're going to encounter like the objective constraints of how we organize a division of labor and how we're going about doing this. And that'll reflect into the larger kind of way we do things in the group. So I think there's a lot we can learn by kind of like honing in on this. One thing that we've talked about actually a few times coming out of the meetups that y'all have had in Brazil is like you've been playing games and stuff. And I was thinking it might be fun to kind of, we could dedicate a Monday meeting or two to essentially doing kind of like writing games where we could take like some of the, I was thinking, for example, with the 6 theses on the conjuncture, there's a lot of different ways we could explain that to people. And there's a lot of different kind of like creative writing games we could potentially do to try to like give people an opportunity to collectively write things, to actually like kind of pass paragraphs around, or I don't know, there's just little things we could do that could be fun and kind of group dynamic building, but could also actually like attempt to collectively write, not just kind of we go off home, we write, and then we bring together, but we actually try to do some work together in the meeting. So yeah, so those are a few things there. While I agree on the, well, I mean, I agree in general that like small publishers are going to be more averse to risks. I'm not exactly convinced. I don't really know at this point in 2024 of like the hybrid environment already, what is considered a risk in that. I'm not sure having a website wouldn't be considered more insurance in an age of online marketing. Like, as long as we could say that the book stands alone, that might be an asset. I don't know. Like, I think there's just a lot of open questions. especially since our work is already so weird. It might just seem on brand to be weird. I don't know. So, but yeah, I mean, I do think there's a lot to explore on the like the feasibility and reality of like trying to get our stuff published. As far as case studies, I think that that's a great opportunity to engage in what Gabriel identified as the analytic and compositional layers. And so maybe we could actually try, like if we do have stuff that's parallel, I think the case studies would probably be that, right? Like maybe there'll be certain people that could interact with groups they already have affinities with in Brazil, or different places in the United States, or we might have folks that interact directly with the Communist Caucus or whatever, right? So that might be an opportunity to work, and we don't know how that'll go. I don't want the whole book. My concern about the case studies would be I wouldn't want the book to hinge on a completion of a particular case study, because I feel like there's just a lot of challenges. They're very contingent on outsides. Like there's a lot there. So I think if we were to parallel that, we could very easily incorporate it. We could at the very least kind of co-produce them, so we could have a similar kind of language and aesthetic, so that as they come out, they all seem part of the same piece. But yeah, and then finally, this is a question. This seems like the kind of thing precisely that the research coordinator is tasked, you know, kind of tying a lot of these knots and kind of how we link a lot of the existing research. So I'm curious, I'll end on the question, like, how are we going, what is the role of the research coordinator in relationship to this book?
Gabriel, you're muted if you're talking, but I can answer that, or try to talk about it at least.
Sorry, go along then.
Yeah, I mean, I'm open to ideas. I think this meeting has been really rich with suggestions. So I think part of my job as RC will be to go back through this meeting and take better notes, because I haven't been taking close notes, because I was surprised at how many ideas we would have off just this one meeting. But yeah, I need to, we have an AI, yeah, maybe that'll help. But yeah, so collecting all the ideas from this meeting, I think will be my first job, and then we can put it to a vote, or at least have it on writing, the different formats. I love the idea of having different types of meetings where we experiment with collective writing, or reading and revising live, maybe. Also love the idea of having integrating this with Discord. I think Discord is a good structure. Having different channels for different chapters or topics might be good. But yeah, so short answer is I need to collect all the ideas from this meeting as a first step. But yeah, as far as the larger question of how the RC should interact with the book project, I guess it depends on if this book project is now the centerpiece of what we're doing this year, then that actually makes it a lot easier, because I was planning on going to each person and talking and asking them what they're going to research this year. But if we're just doing the book, then that answers that question, that everyone's focus will be related to the book in some way. That's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, what I was gonna say, I mean, I agree with John. I think that there is a lesson to be learned from the comparison, I think, between two texts where there was tension in writing, which were the Working Through Political Organization text, and the Social Atoms, the Social Worlds kind of like exercise, versus the Atlas. The Atlas was 140 pages written in a month. That's, you know, a success case somehow, right? Versus these other two where there were tensions and discussions and so on. And I think that one thing that facilitates the Atlas and made the other ones difficult, and I think that it's, in my opinion, where non-linearity should come in, and it can come in, is that with a skeleton, you don't need, the linear basis is set. So you can come in non-linearly. So you can say, I want to add a section after this one, and it will be on a side note, on a side topic, or I want, you know, things like that. So you can get a bit of that Atlas feel. I think that part of the problem of the two texts that were tensions, of course, there can be other reasons. I take also part of the responsibility over that due to my own issues, like in the case of the working through text, like micromanaging, whatever. I mean, there are definitely issues that are my own there, but there's also a structural reason, which is the group is not totally ordered. We're not a group where we go from, you know, you're out or you're in, and therefore you agree on everything. We have very varied positions, varied levels of understanding of the ideas, but also varied interpretations of these ideas. So there's something about something that is non-linear, something that is, you know, like a lattice or like spaced out, that is very fitting. For example, a wiki would definitely be some, at least on paper, looks like something we could do, because people can just spread their ideas, and the group is kind of spreading its ideas. So it's a shape that fits that. Whereas something linear, you set up an argument, and either the next sentence fits that argument or it doesn't. So it brings a constraint into the discussion that we're not used to working with. And in those moments, it's true, people who have more degrees of concatenation, or who wrote what came before, wrote what came later, or whatever, they tend to get a certain weight in the discussion, while people who are coming from a more lateral perspective might not. What I just wanted to say, which I think it's the other side of doing writing experiments and things like this, which I think we should do, I think it's a really good idea in general, is that there is a trade-off in this particular case, which is to accept linearity, to accept some degree of total ordering, right? Not every lateral idea would fit a book, because a book does require some level of concatenation. But either from the standpoint of already having a skeleton, and therefore people can kind of find their place in it kind of with more space, right? Rather than just a line, because we're not writing step by step. The basic step by step is a given, let's say, or because even if you do say, okay, there is a debate here. If I had time, if I had more time with the group, I'd probably pick this point, and there will be a conflict of discussions here. Well, if the book comes out, then it will be easier to decentralize even more radically later. So even in that sense, there is a trade-off where linearity begets this non-linearity we were talking about, right? So I do think being realist, I don't think we're gonna finish this project if we don't accept some degree of, okay, this is what fits into this pre-structure here. There's still a lot of freedom, a lot of things we can add, but probably a lot of things will, you know, benefit from the space that it will open for dissensus, with some basic invariance to structure and maintain things together, rather than fit already inside of it, right? I mean, even the RC issue, I think it doesn't solve totally, because I'm 100% sure there are a lot of interesting things being developed on STP right now by members that we wouldn't be able to fit in the book anyway. So we still would need to track those things, because they will still exist, even if we did all arrive at the idea that the book should be a central project. So I don't know, you know, I don't want to disencourage the plurality, but I do think that there will be some negotiation needed in that sense. I think it would be much easier and less tense than the two last writing experiences we had, and closer to the Atlas in many senses. I think that depending on the structure we agree on which new sections, where the meat is going to come in, it might be a short writing project. We might find out that a lot of things are much closer to being written, you know, and added. And then it's not like a year and a half writing. Sometimes it's much shorter than that. But I do think it's more of Atlas than the last writing engagements we did, but we do have this tension, which is, you know, a bit structural, that to put something into some type of linear argument does constrain what comes into the text. And there is some degree of, you know, by the way, or lateral argument that you can make, but after some point, you need to say, okay, for this project, this will fit. What I think makes it less troubling is that overall, the outcome should facilitate that the census is then, you know, celebrated and there's more space for it, because then we have the book. We don't need to trust what people are saying, right? And it's easier to criticize as well, and things like that. So I think, so that's something I'm not sure. I don't think it goes against what John said, but I do think it's something also to also consider when planning the book. And the other thing, I think that there is on the case study or the analytic thing, I think it's a really good place also to choose where is politics going to happen on S2P. Is it happening on the page at the level of the, you know, is the core of it that when we make our arguments, we're already answering to these demands? Like, but what about the political prescription, or what about the application of this? There might be some of that, but there's also the possibility that we streamline the writing of this book so that the analytic and the composition can happen elsewhere once the book is published. So this is missing from the book. We can answer, yes, that's why you should meet us next month, you know? So it's not obvious to me that also the book should have like things that answer in every direction. I think that it's a different thing to treat the book as a means to facilitate the sensibility change, the educational change. Like, again, people might not understand things in the book, but we might make ourselves available to explain. So the educational might happen elsewhere. That happens with most books. A lot of people don't understand what they read, but then they understand it through talking to somebody afterwards, right? And using the book as this intermediate object. So I wonder if the book should answer to those things, have something that is striving to change people's sensibilities, striving to educate, striving to allow or display or exemplify this analytic thing, or already, you know, facilitate and play out this compositional thing, or if it is a means to facilitate this thing happening between people outside of the book, you know? And in that case, the book can be smaller and can be harder because we're making ourselves available. What cannot happen is, you know, saying we're not going to solve these issues or address them in the book, but then not make ourselves available to continue, right? And deal with those things outside of the book. So, but I do think that that's an important thing. So just putting those two kind of realistic kind of counterpoints.
Yeah, and on that last point, in that sense, we probably should come up with a list of things that we don't want to put in the book then, as we're writing it, and not, you know, not immediately, but as we're writing it, maybe part of our workflow is deciding on things we will not go into detail on. Or is your point simply that we don't need to feel the pressure of having to answer everything?
Yeah, not feel the pressure. Yeah, it's
Okay.
simpler. I mean, I don't think we can do it as now. I mean, it's late, but I think that we should in the near future be able to look at this thing here. You know, we don't need to do it now. People can start thinking about it. Perhaps they need to reread some stuff to have something to say. But to look at this structure of these two texts and say, well, I think that there is a section missing between these two. Or, you know, after we introduced all these concepts, we can now talk about, you know, a theory of race, or discuss sexuality, or we could go much more in detail into this. I'm going to add something like, what do people want to add and make themselves responsible for delivering, right? And then, like, I mean, I think that's the first concrete step. What is that people want to add? Once we see all of that, we can discuss, right? What are you thinking in these terms? What would you add here? Okay, once you have a draft, we get a chance to see what everyone thinks about it and things like that, right? and then people who revise and so on, we will know what's missing and how far we can take. But let's say saying something like, we need case studies. Okay, who's gonna do the case studies? Like building trust between organizations and building like with who? What is that? You know, like unless somebody says I can add a subsection here with a case study, or I'm gonna make myself responsible. So I think that will make it more concrete. But again, it's something for a next step, because I know it's also late.
Okay, yeah, I think what I'll do is send a WhatsApp message with some of the next steps that we need to do based on what you just said, Gabriel, and what everyone else has been saying in the chat. Yeah, it would be nice if we could already move all discussions about the book into Discord if it's ready for that. But yeah, there's gonna be some period of time. Some people are still using WhatsApp, so we should send it on WhatsApp first.
Cool, guys. Dennis, I think I've never used the Zoom AI. It's the first time. So let's see if it works. But apparently it just took notes from the meeting. So I'll just send them your way.
Okay, great, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be happy for this job to be automated, so I don't have to
That would be
watch the whole video again.
Okay.
I don't want to damper expectations, but I've used the Zoom AI once and it wasn't so,
Really,
it was more artificial than intelligent.
I see.
But it was a meeting. What was it, an STP meeting? I don't remember. Maybe that was the problem. It wasn't in English. So that could be a good factor.
Okay, well, we'll test it now. Otherwise, I have that Read AI one. I just didn't link it to this meeting. But there's that one works very well. We can try next time.
Okay, great meeting, everyone.
Yeah.
See you all next
Thanks,
time.
everyone.
all. Till
See you
next
later.
time.
Bye.
Bye bye.